Hello, hi, and welcome to our 3 key questions on culture, cultural heritage, and climate change seminar. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for being with us, both the speakers and the public. I'll just give very brief information. There is simultaneous interpreting. So on the bottom of the screen, you will see an icon of a globe. If you push that icon, you can choose the language you want to hear the seminar in. The other short thing I have to say is that we're a bit short of time. So I ask you to try to keep in the times that you were given, so that we might have some discussion at the end with the public. For the people following the seminar, there is a chat underneath where it says question and answers. If you want to pose questions to our speakers or contribute to the final discussion, please feel free to write, even during the seminar, your comments. And now I'd like to invite Marcello Minuti, General Coordinator of the Fondazione, to greet all of you.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you, everybody. I'm Marcello Minuti. I'm the coordinator of the Fondazione. I speak on behalf of Alessandra Vittorini, our director, who recommended me to greet and thank all of you. We are here today trying to put a little drop in the wide ocean of climate change. As a foundation, in collaboration with Ministry of Culture, we have just ended a huge project concerning these themes. The project was about the feasibility of an observatory on climate change and cultural heritage in the urban context. This project is one of the initiatives included in the Urban Agenda for Europe, promoted by European Commission. Just would like to outline three little reasons why our foundation is highly committed to these themes. One, I must say that in this kind of policy, as such as in the brand new policies, at the very beginning, we feel like a gap between the theory, the strategies on one side, and the daily practice on the other side. And we think that in the middle of this gap, training and dissemination are fundamental levers to bridge the huge gap existing. And the second reason is we think that this gap can be bridged only if we work together. So connection are very important in this perspective. And so today we are here trying to put in together various perspectives that deal with culture and climate change. Researchers, pilot action, activists, artists, and so on. Third, we think that dealing with climate change and cultural activities needs transversal competences and not only specialism. So our school, as an education institute dedicated to people operating and managing culture, is deeply committed in enabling trained transversal competences. We think that the new complex challenges regarding cultural heritage can be faced only by professionals with a profile rich of transversal, horizontal, and specialized skills. So what we do today? Today we have 3 questions on how to talk about climate crisis and culture, because how to us is fundamental, and it's the fundamental issue that we must understand in order to pass from one bank, the strategies, to the other bank, that are the daily practices. So professionals of culture should act, giving their contribution at the general aims, but how? So it's an individual or a collective responsibility. They should act in a cognitive or in an affective way, and so on. I just give in the last minute some instructions. So this meeting, as Francesca maybe said, is recorded. You can view it again if you miss something on our web learning site, where you can also find a rich catalog of lessons, conferences, and other learning documents. And also, starting from today, starting from now, exactly, you can find on our website the first deliverables of the project Urban Agenda, as such as a searchable knowledge base, in which you can find a huge source of data and information about culture and climate change, as such as policies, programs, subjects, and so on. And at the end, I must thank, of course, our conductor, that is Francesca Neri. Francesca is the head of the innovative project area, but also Paolo Verdone and Giuliana Di Francesco from Ministry of Culture, Paolo Vitti and Andrew Potts that addressed the fundamental scientific view of the project, Agnieszka Smigel and Francesca Paino that did the research with responsibility and very deep passion, and also Snežka Mihajlović from Europa Nostra for their support. Thank you very much, and I give the floor back to Francesca.
Thank you, Marcello. So now Paolo Verdone will address the audience. He's the representative of the Ministry of Culture. He's the dirigente dei servizi terzo e sesto del Segretariato Generale del Ministero della Cultura, our fundamental partner in all these achievements.
Thank you, Francesca, and thank you, Marcello. I am Paolo Verdone. I'm the Director of International Relations of the General Secretariat of the Ministry of Culture, and I am really glad of my greetings to all of you, to Secretary General Mihajlović, to all the professor and experts, to Professor Vitti, and to other speakers that will participate today. I am just a few words to say that it is now quite clear what a proactive role culture and cultural heritage and the arts can play for climate action and for contributing to the success of policies and strategies addressing climate change at all levels. In fact, creative imageries drives desires, and thus also the production of commodities. Narratives and artistic performances actually find their way in a certain way to people's emotions, so shaping the perception of reality, and can therefore motivate action and behavioral change with regards to climate change. The relationship between culture and cultural heritage and climate change, I would say, is in a certain way bidirectional. Cultural heritage has to be protected from climate change, and at the same time it can help to addressing it as well. It is able to provide solutions for mitigation and adaptations, and can contribute to achieving ambitious political goals, such as those set by the European Green Deal, and as, by the way, the Europa Nostra's Green Paper brilliantly demonstrated. At the global policy level, the first ever G20 meeting of the Ministry of Culture, held in Rome under Italian presidency last July, issued an official declaration recognizing the importance of addressing climate change through culture. Later, also the G20 Leaders Declaration underlined the role of culture and creativity as drivers for sustainable development and in fostering the resilience of our society, and committed to further pursue the G20 cooperation on culture. So now actually it's the right time, I think, to speed up participation of cultural communities in climate action. We all know that community involvement is always a key for success of policies. So I am really confident that this roundtable will contribute to shed light on the potential that culture and cultural heritage can unleash for successfully addressing climate change, and in particular, how lessons learned in different projects, in different contexts from various projects and initiatives can provide valuable inputs to policy developments at local, national, and as well as European and international level. So I would like therefore to thank you very much, and a very fruitful discussion, and I'll give the floor back to Francesca. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce Snežka Kraljić-Mihajlović, Secretary General of Europa Nostra, who has been a great indicator of the way forward in our research, contributing to giving a direction to a lot of what we've been working on and thinking. So, Snežka, please.
Buongiorno, hello everyone. Thank you so much, Francesca, for your introduction, and thank you for the invitation to just address a few words at the very beginning of this very important webinar. After the words of Marcello and Paolo, I'm delighted to see that we are all on the same wavelength. In a way, I'm joining a sort of a harmonious trio to greet you. We are all very much aware that we have something extraordinary to discuss, but at the same time that there is that gap that Marcello was talking about, and that we must bridge that gap. We must bridge the gap between the strategic orientation, and we have just heard that at all levels we have the recognition of the strategic relationship between climate action and cultural heritage, but we have to put it into practice. And that's why, you know, me as a representative of Europa Nostra, and Europa Nostra being the voice of civil society, the European voice of civil society committed to cultural heritage, we're delighted to see that we are working together, bridging these gaps and sort of bringing precisely what Marcello said in a transversal way, in a multidisciplinary way, bringing all the various stakeholders, all the various knowledge in various disciplines, and of course, having the citizens and civil society organization, the inhabitants of the cities involved in this fundamental transformation of our life, basically, of our way of thinking, of our mindset. And this was a message also from the this important document, the European Cultural Heritage Green Paper that Europa Nostra presented in March 2021. I hope you would agree with me that 2021 was really a year of a breakthrough, I would say, at European level, and that it is now we have this momentum that was created because together also with the momentum created by the new European Bauhaus, the document that we have adopted, a serious document, and of course the work of the EU Urban Agenda program as well, we now know that we cannot achieve the European Green Deal if we do not put culture and cultural heritage at the heart of that green transformation of our society, of our economy. Because only 3 years ago, in 2019, when the European Green Deal was adopted, culture was not mentioned in the fundamental document. So we all have joined forces and our voices and our knowledge in order to sort of fill that very serious gap. And we were helped in this process also by the launch of the new European Bauhaus. The president of the European Commission, I think you all know that she said that this is what gives the soul to the whole Green Deal. And so now we have that incredible challenge to put all that knowledge and forces together. And I want to praise, of course, our hosts. I want to praise Italy. And me as a non-Italian, I think it is up to me to praise Italy because you have played an extremely important role all along, but especially in 2021, when Italy was the chair of G20 with with this historic Rome Declaration adopted in the Colosseum, and your role that you have also played with COP26. So in COP26, never before we have had as much also cultural heritage voices represented there. And Europa Nostra in Glasgow also accepted the role to be the regional co-chair for Europe of the Climate Heritage Network, an important network that I think many people in the audience are probably already member of that network. And we, in this way, want to show that the commitment of Europa Nostra to this topic does not end by the publication of our green paper in March. It's rather, it has been a beginning of our much stronger involvement and working closely with so many partners, from the European Union institutions to members of the European Parliament, the research community, and of course the public authorities at all levels of governments, from local to the global, above Europe, even in the global. So we have a great challenge. And when I said I want to praise Italy, it's also not, probably not a coincidence that also Europa Nostra is represented through Professor Paolo Vitti, our board member, Italian eminent, the member of our board, who has contributed on behalf of Europa Nostra to the work of Fondazione Scuola dei Beni e Attività Culturali. And I want to praise that work that you have done, because making a knowledge base and bringing all that knowledge together, producing also the report. I look forward to the presentation of the important report that is going to underpin the work of the European Union for the creation of the observatory of the relationship between culture, cultural heritage, climate action in the relationship of the cities and the urban framework. So just to tell that we are delighted to be part of that mobilization. Time is running. And we can't afford fragmentation and duplication of efforts. So somehow the Europa Nostra's commitment to working together, and we really very much look forward to bringing in this transversal, horizontal way, all the partners together, including the civil society. Count on Europa Nostra to be a very active player in this fundamental transformation of our way of life and our way of thinking.
Thank you very much. So we'll start now to get into the issues with Giuliana De Francesco from the Ministry of Culture. She is responsible del coordinamento attività di rilevanza europea e internazionali del Ministero della Cultura. And she will introduce the urban agenda for the EU Cultural Heritage Partnership. Giuliana, please.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you hear me.
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you for my introduction. I am in fact a ministry official working for the Department of International Relations at the Secretariat General of the Ministry of Culture. I have the privilege of presenting you with some background information on the genesis, let's say, of today's debate that has its roots in the urban agenda for the EU. I sent you a PowerPoint presentation just to be a little less boring in doing this. I wonder if you could show it on screen or if I should upload that myself. Okay, thanks. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you very much. You can go to the next one, please. Very briefly, I will tell a few words on the urban agenda for the EU, and in particular, the Culture and Cultural Heritage Partnership that we are together a member of. And we'll explain something on Action 9 of the Action Plan of the Culture and Cultural Heritage Partnership that aims at preparing an observatory on culture, cultural heritage, and climate change in the urban framework. Next, please. The next, please. The urban agenda for the EU had a rather long period of incubation, of maturation. The idea sets out from the consideration that cities are confronted with the main issues of our time. 2/3 of Europeans live in cities. Cities are engines of European economy. They are the place where opportunities and challenges meet, and cities can act on several main issues. They should therefore be brought closer to the EU policy level, and this could have as effect also the result of bringing the EU closer to its citizens and to empower cities in the EU. The policy background: when the Pact of Amsterdam in 2016 was launched, the next slide, please. Sorry. So the Pact of Amsterdam launches the European Agenda for the EU in 2016. At that time, the policy background at the global level was made by the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, with its holistic and cross-domain approach for the well-being of people, for the planet and prosperity. It identifies 17 goals that are interrelated and are to be pursued with a cross-sectorial approach. So we come out from silos, come out from sectorial policy boundaries. Also in 2015, the Paris Agreement was adopted. It entered into force only in 2016 now. It is a UN legally binding international treaty on climate change. 196 parties committed to undertake ambitious efforts to combat climate change and adapt to its effect, and to limit global warming and greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible, and in any case by mid-century. The implementation of the Paris Agreement requires economic and social transformation. So this makes the Paris Agreement also a general policy framework for UN member states. Also in 2016, the new urban agenda was adopted at the United Nations Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development, Habitat 3, and this represents a shared vision for a better and more sustainable future that has its key in urbanization, that if well planned and well managed, can contribute greatly to sustainable development. At that time, the main development strategy in the EU was Europe 2020, that aimed at reaching by 2020 smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth. And it is only in 2019 that the von der Leyen Commission launches the Green Deal for Europe that makes the Paris Agreement goals its own in a way. The next slide, please. So the urban agenda, as I was mentioning, was launched in May 2016 by the Pact of Amsterdam in order to unlock the potential of cities, strengthen the European dimension in the EU decision-making, and facilitate cooperation at all levels, the EU, the national, and the local level. It introduced a new working method, informal, multi-level cooperations that are focused on stronger partnership on urban matters across all levels of governance, and promoting cooperation between cities, regions, member states, and the European level. As a matter of fact, in all partnerships, the European Commission is present, sometimes with more than one Directorate General, as in our case, and other European Union bodies also actively take part. The three main objectives of the urban agenda and all its partnerships are to achieve better regulation, so better policy making at EU level, better implementation of regulations, and also to improve funding mechanisms and to improve data availability and knowledge sharing. That is a key for development of effective policies and projects in our knowledge society. The next slide, please. So the partnership on culture and cultural heritage is one of 14 partnerships. It was launched in 2018, European Year of Cultural Heritage, and kicked off in 2019. The partnership is coordinated by Germany and Italy jointly. Sorry, you can go to the next slide, please. Germany and Italy are, with that, the Federal Ministry of Interior, Building and Community for Germany, a former ministry whose competences in the new German governments are now split. And for Italy, the Agency for Social Cohesion, together with the Ministry of Culture. The Culture and Cultural Heritage Partnership is particularly broad. Usually a standard urban agenda partnership is composed of 20 to 25 members. Our partnership counts about 30 members, and this is an indicator of the relevance of this topic for our society and our cities in particular. Cultural heritage and culture are embraced in their entirety. So the partnership deals with tangible and intangible heritage, with landscape in their social, economic, and environmental dimensions. We have partners that reflect the composition of urban agenda partnerships as a standard way of composing these partnerships, meaning member states, regions, cities, EU members. In particular, in our case, the European Commission is represented by more than one Directorate General, in particular DG EAC and Education and Culture, and DG Region. We have the Committee of the Regions, the European Investment Bank, and several stakeholders at European level, research actors, but also civil society representatives or professional organizations. You can go to the next slide, please. In line with guidance provided by the Pact of Amsterdam, the main output of partnerships are action plans. The action plan of the Culture and Cultural Heritage Partnership was launched in 2020. It is composed of 11 actions, of which one, action number 9, deals with culture and cultural heritage and climate change in the perspective of the possible establishment of a European organization that we provisionally call Observatory. You can go to the next slide, please. All actions in our action plan are interlinked, and they contribute to 5 integrated and mutually related strategies that deal with cultural services, cultural tourism, resilience, transformation and adaptive reuse of heritage, and cultural and creative sector contribution to urban regeneration. Next slide, please. Back to our action, the Observatory on Culture and Cultural Heritage and Climate Change in the Urban Framework. This is led by the Ministry of Culture that, as mentioned, chose the Foundation School for Cultural Heritage and Activities, I should say it in Italian, Fondazione Scuola dei Beni e delle Attività Culturali, as its main partner for the implementation of activities. And the members of this action reflect the composition of the partnership. We have both cities, regions, the European Commission, the JRC, and URBACT, ICLEI, and are always supported by the 2 European coordinators that I already mentioned. You could go to the next slide, please. When we developed our action plan, it was mid-2020. The Green Deal, the European Green Deal had just been launched, but other initiatives such as the new European Bauhaus were not in sight yet. The pandemic had just started. we realized that not only data were clear and increasingly clear on the risks for people on our planet caused by climate change, but also there were more and more episodes, more and more demonstration of how this climate change could affect cultural heritage via floods, fires, and other phenomena. We were inspired in particular by the goals 11 and 13 of the urban agenda, of the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. We were, as Snefka mentioned, we realized that the European Green Deal was a great and ambitious sustainable growth strategy that, however, did not mention culture and cultural heritage explicitly. And we had the feeling that was very clearly and very effectively then put in place and demonstrated by Europa Nostra with a green paper on cultural heritage and climate change, that culture and cultural heritage could not only be affected by climate change, but also contribute to addressing it. So the idea was to analyze the feasibility of and the need, the usefulness of developing some kind of, let's call it think tank, organization, focus group, or even a formally established observatory in order to contribute culture and cultural heritage to benefit, to achieve that culture and cultural heritage could benefit by the instruments put in place by the European Green Deal, contribute to preventing risks of possible loss of cultural heritage in the renovation wave that the European Green Deal was implying, in particular for the energy efficiency of buildings, and explore the potential of culture and heritage to support climate action and transitions to sustainable development, and of course support the implementation at local level, at urban level, of integrated adaptation plans that included culture and cultural heritage in the local context. Next slide, please. So among our main objectives was, first of all, mapping the context. By now, with help of with the substantial work of the foundation, we put together a knowledge base that will be soon online and that currently includes 140 policies, 40 programs, 180 projects, more than 200 actors and 200 papers. And its structures is inspired by the structure of the Future of Our Past report by ICOMOS, published in 2019, if I'm not wrong, and of course with adaptations to the European Cultural Heritage Green Paper. And I should mention here, and I think it was already mentioned, that Andrew Potts, that is the main mind behind both reports, was one of our main consultants here and had played a key role in the development of our action. And next slide, please. Then another output, another objective of the action was building the network. And in this framework, I have to thank Agnieszka Schmigel and Francesca Paino from the Foundation for their dedication and high professionalism, through which they were leading more than 30 interviews to key actors in this area, thematic area, the intersection of culture and heritage, climate change, and the urban context. You can see a list of actors. I will mention that they involve local actors, European actors, global actors, but also national institutes dealing with climate change, dealing with cultural heritage, research actors, and so on. And we are gathering a very rich, substantial, and important feedback from this exercise. And I think this workshop is based also on the inputs that were gathered via these interviews. The next slide, please. Among the outputs that are most relevant for the future of our action are replies by the interviewed on the relevance of an observatory. More than 70% would find this relevant. Main functions this should have, and this would be capacity building, networking, connecting all levels of government, but also various sectoral community, as we realize that the climate change community and the cultural community, the urban communities, they don't talk to each other very easily. They have to develop a common language and common endeavors. So this could be one function for the observatory, to interlink initiatives and actors, and also to bring the local at the global level, inputs gathered at specific levels. This could be transmitted to policymakers at a higher level in order to make the most of such input. Target audiences could be, in the first place, according to the feedback given by interviewers, policymakers, experts, and civil society organizations. And among the main services would be continuously updating the knowledge base, collecting data and information for monitoring the development of the relationship between cultural heritage and climate change, and organizing workshops, conferences, and other exchange opportunities. The next slide, please. Another output that our action should make available is analyzing scope and functions of the possible observatory. An overview of options is already there, again, thanks to the endeavors of the foundation, and this will be discussed later this week with the partnership. Next slide, please. Maybe I went beyond my time limits.
Yes, if you can go towards a conclusion, will be.
Okay, so I will not thoroughly mention the lessons learned, because you will hear from some of them later in the debate. I would like to thank you very much for your kind attention, and give the floor back to Francesca. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliana. I know it was a big challenge to say so many things in such a short time. So we'll start now our round table, and I'll briefly introduce our speakers, but more details are available on the platform. We have Alessandra Bonazza. Since 2004, she's been researcher at the Institute of Atmosphere and Climate Science, CNR, where she leads the unit Impacts on Environment, Cultural Heritage and Human Health. Her research was funded by the very innovative European project NOAA Arc, who won the Europa Nostra Grand Prize Award in 2009. Alessandra Bonazza now teaches environmental impact on material deterioration and aging at Bologna University, and she coordinates the STENCH project. Stefano Della Torre is the president of the Società Italiana per il Restauro dell'Architettura. Since 2001, he's been full professor of architectural restoration in the Politecnico di Milano. He's a consultant to Regione Lombardia for policies of plant conservation of built heritage. We have Professor Rodney Harrison, who is a professor of heritage studies at UCL of archaeology. He has professional experience on natural and cultural heritage conservation, management, and preservation in many, many countries all over the world. He has coordinated or participated in a number of large research projects and author of many relevant publications relevant for our theme. We just want to mention Heritage Critical Approaches, which has recently been translated into Italian as Il patrimonio culturale, un approccio critico. Thorn Massen is one of the founders of the Kövel, urban multifunctional space for innovation, experimentation, and creativity that has the aim to make sustainability tangible and accessible. The Kövel was born from the idea of a group of architects that won a tender to regenerate a shipyard in Amsterdam North. We have Marco Scotini, who is the artistic director of FM Centro per l'Arte Contemporanea and director of the Visual Art and Curatorial Studies Department at NABA in Milan. He's program coordinator for Parco Arte Vivente in Turin, and he has worked with many international institutions as a curator. He has been working on contemporary ecology. In 2018, he was curator for the Incheon Biennale, trying to answer the question, what is ecology today? And finally, Alison Tickle, the founder of Julie's Bicycle, a nonprofit organization focusing on the ecosystem of culture as a central driver in the fight against climate change. Alison Tickle works with the full ecosystem of culture, with funding, procurement, infrastructure, logistics, government, and the artists. And her work and their approach are very, very well known in this field. So let's get to business and start with our questions. So the first one we would like to ask you is, you know, as Marcello said at the beginning, this is very much a conference about how do we make this discourse about climate action and climate change. So while carrying out our research, we perceived a strong polarization where some actors propose a communication focused on individual responsibility, while others insist on the role of collective agency. So what approach do you think is more effective? And first of all, I'd like Rodney Harrison to take the floor.
Thank you, Francesca, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this discussion, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. I think I'm going to answer this question by introducing a project that I co-lead called Reimagining Museums for Climate Action, which I think is probably one of the reasons that I was invited to speak at this event. And I'll drop some links to various websites and publications related to the project into the chat after I've finished speaking. So Reimagining Museums for Climate Action began life as an ideas competition where we invited members of the public, anyone who's not really involved in the museum sector ordinarily, to tell us, how do you think museums would need to change to facilitate you as individuals, as well as the community groups that you represent, to be able to take the sorts of climate action that you want to take as individuals. And we launched the project in 2020, in May 2020 for International Museums Day. And we received around about 250 proposals from 50 different countries. And we worked with a short list of 80 of the people that and collectives that developed proposals to put together a website and an exhibition which we curated for COP26 in Glasgow at the Glasgow Science Centre last year in the Green Zone. And we've also produced a book and a toolkit for museums out of this work. And the project is co-led by myself and my colleague Colin Sterling at the University of Amsterdam. And we work in close partnership with Henry McGee of Curating Tomorrow. And it was developed to address the parts of the Paris Agreement and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to do with the responsibility of institutions and educators to facilitate public participation in climate action. And these parts of those two agreements generally known as Action for Climate Empowerment. And actually last year in Glasgow, there was a new work program on Action for Climate Empowerment, which was agreed. So this is now known as the Glasgow Work Program on Action for Climate Empowerment. And this work program emphasizes in particular the roles of individuals and organizations working together to take climate action. And this is the way that I think that I would answer this question. So what we found in the competition is that many of the entrants focused on the need to communicate and to facilitate greater understanding of the impacts of climate change on individuals and communities across the globe, to motivate collective action for climate, which takes on board the perspectives of a range of different actors and constituents, not just those of humans, but also those of non-human actors and agents. So thinking about how climate change is affecting individuals and collectives in different places around the world, and how we can understand the experiences of climate change whilst also speculating on how climate will affect humans and non-humans in the future. So in answer to the question, I don't see it as particularly helpful to place individual and collective action in opposition to one another, but instead I would like to emphasize that these are different forms of action which aren't mutually exclusive, and that cultural institutions have this responsibility to facilitate individual as well as collective climate action.
Thank you. Alessandra Bonazza, would you like to follow up to what Rodney just said about opposing or not opposing?
Yeah, thank you very much, Francesca. And of course, thank you very much for this invitation. Well, I have to say that I perfectly agree with Rodney. So one approach does not exclude the other. So for sure, both individual and collective involvement and responsibility should be taken into consideration and should be approached with different ways. Well, in introducing me, you have mentioned the Noah's Ark project. So I have to say that since 2004, so this project started in 2004, and well, it was a very innovative project tackling for the first time climate change impact on cultural heritage. A lot of activities and things have been done by the research and the policy level up to now, and a very important turning point has been represented by the European Year of Cultural Heritage in 2018. After that, we had also this very important study on safeguarding cultural heritage from natural and man-made disaster that has been promoted by the DG Education and Culture, and that I had the possibility to coordinate. And well, awareness raising, citizen engagement is a very important process in order to put at the center of the attention cultural heritage in contrasting climate change. Regeneration, safeguarding and protecting cultural heritage has been evidenced and finally recognized to be a very important point for increasing the resilience of the society to climate change. And I'm really, how to say, working and looking which are the processes and advancements in the field going towards this approach. So if we consider that we need absolutely to engage civil society individually and by a collective point of view, because they are very important actors, social players, and which are all involved in the different phases of the decision-making process. So I would absolutely say that it's not only a communication from one side to another. So I'm a researcher, I work with research projects, and always communication of the results is a very important point. And of course, we need to evaluate and we need to find good approaches for communicating the results. At the same time, I think that and this is what we have experienced during the last project that I have coordinated, like, for example, the Interreg Central European project Strange and Protect to Save. What is needed is a co-creative approach. So what we need also is to look at which are the requirements and the needs of the society in order to address which are the results of our research in order to make this approach as much as possible inclusive. So at the end, I really would say that both approaches, so as I was mentioning at the beginning, do not exclude each other. And I will leave the platform to the other colleagues for putting on the table other inputs for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Alison, would you like to take the floor?
Sure, thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I just want to echo everybody, and I think you're probably going to hear a lot of the same value from all of us, because I think this is a really important question, because we're all very good at polarization, and this, it seems to me, lies at the heart of the problem, because regardless of the best ways to mobilize civil society, the core problem here is not method, it is polarization itself. And I have for some time now felt during my 15 years at Julie's Bicycle that our biggest challenge is to learn how to collaborate and to stop polarizing. It's immensely difficult because we come to collaboration with a huge amount of conscious and unconscious baggage, our understanding of past, present, and our views of ourselves. And some of us have got much more heavy lifting to do than others, with much more honesty and much more humility. So at the heart of this question about polarization is an invitation, I think, to breathe into this moment and bring a different regenerative energy, as some of you have already said. Individual action and collective action are not an either or, they are one and the same, a constant dynamic of to and fro reinforcing change. This is the core principle of Julie's Bicycle, really understanding our cultural values, what we value ourselves, how we work, and really trying to work very differently. Because our art, our museums, our heritage are hugely powerful instruments of change, and change can go in all sorts of directions. The individual questions are also the wider questions, and the individual actions are also the wider actions. I think there's something here that's very important about your research findings, because polarization is a cultural value turbocharged by social media, hardwired into our practice via a competitive view of nature as a machine, as hostile, as to be conquered, and that certain communities are less deserving of others, all seen in a global economy built on conflict and supremacy, one group of people better than another. It's in our politics, our cultural wars, and the idea that the market, by stimulating competition, will sort this out. I see it in myself when I seek funding and status and attention. And of course, it's everywhere in culture, which is funded through competitive means, whether philanthropic or institutions of education or finite grant giving or tickets sold. And we are seeing a scramble now that climate and culture are being understood as being deeply interconnected. We're seeing a scramble here. And there's a lesson from Mother Nature, another one, about balance and equilibrium, because the reason we're in this unbalanced state of climate is the same. It's about the inevitable consequences of extractive and supremacist human thinkings. So we could take a more systems-based approach, a more balanced approach, and value collaboration differently. Can we move from the poles of the equator, equi from the Latin, of course, to be smooth, balanced, and later meanings bringing in justice and fairness? And I'll just finish on, within this dynamic of stability, we need an ebb and flow to keep stable. And it's a real moment for us to take on the implications of the climate and environment crisis in culture, to be responsible and aware of ebb and flow and not polarize, because everything matters. And I think there are some incredibly important questions that I'm sure we'll come on to later, which is how we design a cultural community that is fair, that brings into it reparations and honesty, and rethink what we do on our day-to-day so that we can orient towards honesty and good purpose. I think that's all I'll say at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very passionate and interesting. Stefano Della Torre, would you like to add something about non-polarizing approaches to at least climate change, but many other things at the same time?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. Actually, I pretty agree with what I heard about this collaborative and not excluding approaches to melting individual and collective responsibility for actions. Actually, I use to do with buildings and the use and reuse of historic buildings. So I use to understand individual responsibilities, not only for action and engagement, but also for everyday activities. Everyday decisions, individual decisions about lowering the heating system or investing money to step from a traditional heating system to non-renewable energy sources and so on, also at a very little scale. And I think that this kind of individual decisions are the result of both individual awareness and collective actions. And it is very important that these bottom-up and top-down approaches find their meeting point and their cooperation. I do think that this topic of energy efficiency in historic buildings is very important to contribute as we can to reduce the carbon footprint and so on, but also to raise awareness about the role that cultural heritage can have in driving the public opinion towards more wise decisions. It is, in my opinion, very important to support research on putting together knowledge about traditional systems and research. Actually, we have a lot of already carried out researches, applied researches, I mean, on working in this direction on the built cultural heritage. And a lot of solutions are already available for implementation. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So talking about solutions, it's a pleasure to have Ton Massen of Café de Keuvel to talk also about a different approach that it was theirs in creating their pilot place. Please, Ton.
Yes, so thanks for having me here today and for being all here. Yeah, of course, during these times that we have an increasingly accelerating climate crisis, it's very important to think about what is the most effective way to tackle this crisis. And when you have this discussion of, well, either individual action or collective action, I of course agree with what has been said by Rodney and the rest of you that they can go together. But I do think it's important to discuss well, on what should be emphasis. And well, first of all, I think individual action can be really important. For instance, I chose to be vegan. I chose to start a sustainable restaurant. And these things, when more people are doing these things, that can have an impact. But of course, the climate crisis has become so big that it's really important that there is collective action and that companies, governments make policies that really ensure that we stay below 1.5 degrees. But the most important thing I think in this discussion is then you can use either side of the argument to avoid or to take responsibility. You can say, well, you know, the governments have to solve it, so I can still fly. Or you can say, as a polluting company, well, people have to make their own choices as consumers. So, and we just supply. So I think the most important is that everybody takes as much responsibility as you can take, given your position, and that you really take as much responsibility as you can, both in an individual way, as well as in a collective way.
Okay, so the second question deals with loss and damage, which is a category that was introduced by the ICOMOS report to the future of our pasts, and it embraces actions to be undertaken when mitigation or adaptation to climate change are no longer possible. It's the idea that not all cultural heritage can be saved, or at least not in the actual or in the best condition. Again, we're not asking to discuss this in sort of right or wrong ethical perspective, but whether it is effective, whether it would work, whether it is good to give thought to this or not. And first of all, I'd like to ask this question to Stefano Della Torre, please.
Here I am. So from my position, from my perspective, it is difficult to accept the loss. I'm a militant in the preservation sector, and I don't reason in terms of weak sustainability, but of strong sustainability. That is, I think that I cannot substitute, I cannot replace my heritage if I lose my heritage. So if I lose a bridge, if I destroy a bridge, I cannot accept that the new bridge is maybe better than the other one. I'm speaking of bridges, but maybe somebody in Italy can understand. I think that also in the past, the lesson learned from natural disaster was that even when everything is lost, something survives, which is capable to give an address to the reconstruction and to save the memory and to give the basis to work on for the reconstruction and to feed the resilient policy. I think of urban morphology or something like that. Even the memories of abandoned sites after destructive earthquakes could be important and cannot be overlooked. And they keep working as natural assets for the future. I know that in front of this kind of changes, also traditional practices should change. But change is actually a condition of our existence. And I don't think that the change is just to adapt and to lose. If we think in terms of dynamic identities and under a co-evolutionary perspective, we can think not just of adaptation, but of setting up new technologies, new techniques, learning from the past for the future with a kind of continuity, not losing the links with the traditional knowledge systems, but building something new, which is strongly related to our heritage and what we can learn and we can benefit from it.
So, from what we saw, maybe Alison has a slightly different approach to this matter, and it is the reason why we imagined to have this chat because we know that people come from different perspectives and have different views on things. And we wanted to create a space where we could kindly share our different views and try to find a common shared space to discuss them. So Alison, please.
Thank you, Francesca. And also, I don't know if I would actually disagree. I think I might just add to that really interesting perspective. Because, of course, irrevocable loss and ongoing damage are already happening, as we know so well, and has been documented really well by so many in the heritage sector, very importantly, and bringing in those new ways of remembering, those new instruments and tools. But I think underneath all of this, there is choosing, of course, for your question is choosing what to save, who to save, and how to save it. Which means that we need to orient, I think culture and the arts need to orient much more closely around loss and damage. It's a really big question for culture and the arts, particularly in developed economies, mine, European Union, than it is in a global majority economy, because it falls on us to facilitate and fund loss and damage, and that's a big question. And if we can recognize loss and damage as an instrument in which reparations go some way towards bearing the cost of blame, we'll be getting somewhere alongside all those new tools for remembering and saving. Loss and damage as a theme at COP26 is blocked by the European Union and the USA because of the implications for insurance, and that's important to know. I think we need to ask ourselves what the instruments of justice are at our disposal. In the arts, in my world, which is very much around the arts, we're asking questions about, for example, who gets to benefit from, say, a theatre or an art tour, who gets to travel, in whose name, and therefore whose culture, whose dominant values, whose bank accounts. These are really important questions. And who gets the research grants, for example, to look at a cultural heritage loss in, say, Zimbabwe, when the commissioner is a British or an Italian university or a British or an Italian fund. These are quite important questions. So loss and damage is one of the critical lenses of justice and transformation, and it's very important. How we understand and then how we animate it in our day-to-day choices really matters. Intangible heritage includes the arts, the storytelling, the poets, and as Stefano said, how we remember and how we really look at what is new. Because as he says, there is an opportunity for really refreshing and really rejuvenating what is being lost. And for anybody interested, Julie Spicer is running a session on loss and damage on February the 1st, looking very specifically at the arts and creative sector, I think a bit more so than heritage, because so much of it is rooted in performative and creative practice. Thank you.
If you want to share the link to your events, you can do that in the chat.
Lovely.
And
thank you, Francesca.
Marco, we moved, ci siamo spostati alla domanda successiva, che è quella sulla perdita e sulla possibilità di parlare della perdita di un passato che non sarà possibile conservare così com'è. In qualche modo è una domanda che ha a che fare con come il cambiamento climatico trasforma proprio la nostra comprensione di che cos'è l'arte. Se hai voglia di riprendere da qui.
Allora, scusate per prima, non so che cosa sia successo, francamente magie della tecnica, però vorrei dire qualcosa rispetto a quello che non ho detto appunto prima, nel senso che non volevo immediatamente allinearmi a quello che diciamo coralmente è stato detto, nel senso che la questione della domanda precedente sul rapporto tra, come dire, responsabilità collettive, responsabilità individuale, per me non è come dire un problema di volontariato e di buonismo, è un problema realmente serio che presuppone diciamo una messa in discussione di queste stesse categorie.
e vorrei partire appunto dal protocollo di Kyoto del 97, quando appunto si riteneva che paesi e persone dovevano assumersi responsabilità comuni ma diversificate, un po' l'argomento appunto di Chakrabarty. E la questione appunto che io vedo come questione macroscopica è che rischiamo attraverso questo slogan del climate change di ricostruire un'ennesima versione dell'occidentalismo, e cioè un'ennesima versione, diciamo così, dell'astrazione che è totalmente contraria alla tematica ecologista di cui noi discutiamo. Cioè, faccio un esempio, se chiedo a un mio studente che cos'è il climate change, lo sa per i mass media, ma se chiedo a un mio studente di arte che cos'è il clima, naturalmente mi mostra le notizie meteorologiche e non sa più che cosa è il clima. Quindi, come dire, da un lato io trovo che prima della questione responsabilità collettiva, responsabilità individuale, responsabilità collettiva diversificata, dobbiamo chiederci veramente, cioè fino a che punto un tema come quello del climate change non sia, come dire, un tema che eccede veramente le possibilità individuali e le possibilità comunitarie in senso spaziale e in senso temporale di intervenire su temi di oggi. L'impressione è che siamo di fronte, come dire, a qualche cosa, un oggetto inconoscibile, un iperoggetto, come dice Timothy Morton, che scoraggia sia, come dire, l'iniziativa individuale e l'iniziativa collettiva. Questo è il primo aspetto. L'altro aspetto veramente, come dire, comunità, ma di che tipo? Noi stiamo focalizzando l'attenzione sulla comunità urbana, ma la comunità rurale è un altro aspetto fondamentale. E dall'altro lato ancora un'ulteriore domanda, cioè se dobbiamo comunque agire collettivamente. Gli esempi che ho portato, diciamo, sono tutti per Caribbean Film Collective dall'Australia e per esempio Fernando Garcia Dori dalla Spagna, Navjot Altaf dall'India. Sono situazioni in cui, devo dire, se nell'arte contemporanea devo trovare un filo comune, sicuramente siamo veramente in artisti che lavorano dentro collettività, il caso di Caribbean Collective, Elisabeth Piovinelli della Columbia University, che lavora appunto con diciamo indigeni delle distretti del nord Australia. Ecco, però quello che ritrovo, come dire, dentro questa procedura è quello che viene definito devolution rispetto a empowerment, e cioè una mutua pedagogia piuttosto che appunto la classica attitudine della sinistra classica, no? Della leadership che si misura, diciamo, con persone tenute fuori, diciamo, dalle possibilità decisionali. Questi sono degli aspetti e naturalmente, come dire, rispetto alla questione della salvaguardia del patrimonio, e qui è certo che è fondamentale, cioè mi sorprende e non mi sorprende da un certo punto di vista che, come dire, la prima versione del Patto Verde non aveva a che fare con, non avesse incluso la cultura, quando la cultura è veramente l'aspetto centrale, fondamentale di questa questione, altrimenti di cosa ci stiamo parlando? Se deve essere ancora una questione scientifica, siamo ancora tutti dentro la modernità, voglio dire, siamo ancora tutti dentro il capitalismo della modernità, e quindi allora che cosa vogliamo realizzare? Cioè che cosa vogliamo cambiare? Questa è la mia domanda fondamentale, essendo a contatto con artisti di differente provenienze e latitudini. Sicuramente questo è anche l'aspetto importante, perché qui parliamo del patto europeo. Sappiamo benissimo che è una situazione in cui, come dire, ormai la mutua interdipendenza sicuramente dentro una scala globale fondamentale, ma le responsabilità di chi sono e come devono essere trattate. Questo veramente mi pare fondamentale. Dall'altra parte vorrei, come dire, siccome parliamo di cultura, come dire, allontanare veramente quell'idea che si sta profilando sempre più di patrimonio culturale, di museificazione delle città, di museificazione della natura, di museificazioni del retaggio culturale, perché proprio come diceva appunto recentemente anche Giorgio Agamben, sicuramente, come dire, per museo non intendiamo più un luogo definito, prestabilito, un luogo chiuso, ma è una modalità con musealizzazione identifichiamo una separazione tra qualche cosa e la possibilità di usarlo. Ecco che allora proprio lavorare, diciamo, con indigeni australiani piuttosto che con indiani di sicuramente zone calde del pianeta e con altre realtà cosiddette svantaggiate, certo ci aiuta a capire veramente cosa sia la cultura e la salvaguardia della cultura. Quindi per favore non solo decentramento dell'umano ma decentramento dell'Occidente. Grazie.
Okay. Alessandra Bonazza, would you like to get back to our perspective on mourning the loss or not?
Yeah. Well, so thank you very much to all of you, all the speakers, because looking and hearing different perspectives change also, and I'm changing also my mind and my enriching them with several inputs. Well, this is a very delicate issue. So my very first reply to this question is that no, I don't want to accept to lose anything. This is something. On the other side, when we talk about loss and damage, and which is caused by climate change, I really feel that in spite of all the knowledge that we had, in spite of all the work that we have done up to now, it is not enough. So still there is not a clear recognition by I would say, a quantitative point of view, which are the losses, which are the damages on the different types of heritage, both tangible and intangible. So I still really believe that we need to work and to continue working on that, increasing awareness on that. This is still linked, I think, to the involvement of citizens, and both individually and collectively, because if we are aware of what we risk to lose, we are more committed and we are more involved in the process of protecting. So, well, and also looking and hearing what you have, listening what you have said, looking at the past, in my opinion, is very much important. So I would see this process of protecting culture and cultural heritage towards climate change as a cycle. So looking at the past in order to be more prepared in facing the future challenges and the current challenges, which are the traditional techniques in the past, which were the good and bad practices, and integrate them in our process. So I see that really is a continuous cycle, and changing is needed for making a sustainable approach. As a researcher, I have been often called to set priorities. So which are the priorities? Which are the cultural heritage that we would like to save? Which is more important, the tangible one, the intangible one? This is very difficult. It's really difficult because it deals with the socio-economic and also economic value of cultural heritage. It is the identity of people, of society. It's very difficult, but at the same time, we are asked to give priorities, but also in a quantitative way. I would say a ranking of priorities. This is very much needed because we have resources, and these resources has to be addressed. So which are the parameters that we use for making a good prioritization of the cultural heritage that should be protected, safeguarding. So a very, in my opinion, integration of all the benefits from the experience of the past for making our society more resilient to the future is absolutely important. And I will leave the discussion to the others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Rodney Harrison, would you like to react?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to answer from the perspective of another research project called Heritage Futures that I was the principal investigator on for about 5 years. And this involved a team of, it was a very large project, a team of 16 researchers across a number of different countries working with a range of different fields of heritage practice and 25 different organizations representing these fields of both natural as well as cultural conservation and preservation, everything from endangered language preservation to cryogenic freezing of endangered DNA in frozen zoos, to built heritage conservation, to landscape management, rewilding, but also some things that we don't normally think of as related to conservation, which we felt it would be quite helpful to bring into the conversation with heritage practitioners, things like nuclear waste management. And we also worked with one of the artists that worked on the gold discs that were placed onto the Voyager missions and sent into outer space, which is another sort of world heritage, right? Another way of kind of representing humanity. And one of the things that we found in this project, so the project really aimed to engage very seriously with this idea that heritage is about and done on behalf of future generations. Like we often hear this thing said that heritage is we conserve things for future generations or on behalf of future generations. But what we found was that actually, you know, this question of when is the future that you're conserving things for? How long into the future do you think that you're going to be able to conserve things? Who will inherit that future? How do you know what the values will be of the people that and perhaps potentially non-human agents that inherit that future are? And if you think about the very long-term futures, for example, of kind of nuclear waste preservation 100,000 years into the future, that really begins to change your perspective about what are the appropriate mechanisms for conserving historic buildings, for example. And it also kind of proves that there's a certain kind of ridiculousness to the idea that we'll be able to hold on to certain kinds of things forever. In fact, you know, it's its own sort of fiction, really, to believe that we can conserve things for a very long time into the future. So at the end of this project, we came to this perspective that, you know, in many ways, change is inevitable. Lighthouses will fall into the sea, buildings will eventually crumble. And when we see things from a much longer term perspective, attempts to arrest this kind of change may in fact be seen to be quite wasteful, and in fact, in many ways, quite unsustainable. And we felt that this work raised two issues. First, that we need to find ways of working with rather than against natural processes of change. Like we need to come up with better ways of losing things. So we have another follow-on project which we're working with the National Trust and Historic England and Natural England, looking at, you know, ways in which land may be managed for change rather than against change. And we've been working on this, describing this process as forms of adaptive release. And I'll put into the link box a paper where we explore this concept in more detail. And the aim of this project is really to acknowledge the creative possibility of loss and change, which also, after all, is integral to what it is that we understand as heritage and how we define heritage. Heritage is something that we perceive to be somehow rare or at risk or endangered in some way or another. And I think the second thing it suggests is that we need to find new ways of expressing attachments to or the values of the things that we hold dear from the past, which is really what preservation is. It's a kind of culturally appropriate mode of valuing or attributing values to things. So we also need to embrace new ways of appropriately mourning things which we value, which we will inevitably lose. And I think there's one really great example of this, which is a project called Foghorn Requiem, which was developed by the artists Lisa Artagena and Josh Portway. And it's a piece, I'll also put a link to this into the chat box, but it's a piece of music that was written to kind of mourn the loss of the sound of the foghorn from the British coastal landscape. And it's a score that is written for 3 brass bands plus a lighthouses foghorn and the foghorns of 50 boats that were assembled at the time at which this was played. And there's this wonderful film that captures this kind of performance of this piece of music, this score. And that to me is a kind of, it's a way of kind of mourning appropriately the loss of something. And there are many other examples. But to me, yeah, there are many aspects of loss which are inevitable, and thinking about loss in this way, which is slightly different to thinking about the kind of technical definition of loss and damage in terms of climate change, which is also to do with justice and compensation, you know, which I think is also really important in relation to heritage, because these things are integrally related to questions of cultural heritage, the ways in which cultures have treated other cultures, and the impediments that these treatments have caused for certain groups of people to be able to develop in certain kinds of ways. So, but I think this question of kind of appropriate ways of mourning and getting better at losing are also issues that are ones that the cultural heritage sector really needs to engage quite urgently. Thank you.
Thank you. Marco, vuoi riprendere sul loss and damage
Ma come dicevo prima, credo appunto la questione che ritengo fondamentale, anche seguendo veramente alcuni artisti. Ricordo di aver lavorato con un gruppo indiano, appunto dal nome Ura Mili, che per anni, diciamo, ha cercato di registrare non solo, come dire, i rumori, i suoni del lavoro prodotti direttamente, come dire, da dinamiche del lavoro, chiaramente per lavori in via di sparizione, ma anche diciamo soprattutto come dire dei canti legati al lavoro. Sto parlando della regione del Nagaland in India, e la cosa importante appunto quando parliamo in qualche modo di come dire perdita o appunto di patrimonio, la cosa importante in questo caso era come, diciamo, questi canti nei terrazzamenti di riso che appunto se andarono perduti, perdere un linguaggio, diciamo, è perdere veramente anche la chiave di accesso a quel mondo letteralmente. Quindi questo, come dire, questa modalità di concepire un ecosistema o ecosistematicamente, e appunto in cui come dire si cerca di instaurare un nuovo rapporto di rispetto non solo di quell'ambiente, ma alla interdipendenza, alla mutualità delle relazioni e dei rapporti, diventa fondamentale per ripensare fondamentalmente come dire la cultura. Ora, quello che voi avete detto all'inizio veramente, come dire, è in qualche modo la possibilità di superare un gap costitutivo, ma questo gap costitutivo della cultura io credo che lo continuiamo assolutamente lo lasciamo assolutamente intatto se continuiamo a pensare nelle modalità classiche anche veramente, come dire, la perdita o in qualche modo la possibilità di preservazione, no? Nel senso che ci sono, come dire, tutta una modalità di interconnessioni che diventano fondamentali all'interno di un altro discorso, forme appunto sicuramente per le quali siamo chiamati in causa e che sono transdisciplinari nel vero senso del termine, anche transculturali, e questo naturalmente significa proporsi appunto degli obiettivi che immediatamente non debbono essere inquadrati inquadrati dentro quell'idea di musealizzazione di cui parlavo anche prima, cioè che ci siamo raccontati prima, e cioè questo fatto in qualche modo di pensare alla sopravvivenza delle cose attraverso, come dire, una loro salvaguardia fisica nel momento in cui si sottrae tutto il contesto, no? Che in qualche modo per il quale è stato utilizzato quell'edificio piuttosto che un altro manufatto. Quindi credo che questo, cioè questo modo di pensare, cominciare a pensare la musealizzazione, diciamo, delle città, degli edifici, dei paesaggi, in qualche modo come separazione dell'uso, sia ancora totalmente nel verso, diciamo così, del retaggio occidentalocentrico e totalmente, diciamo, antiecologista. Quello che io trovo fondamentale all'interno di questo discorso è cominciare ad abbandonare sempre più quella che Deleuze e Guattari chiamavano scienza di Stato, il rapporto, diciamo, a quello che definivano una scienza nomade. No, credo che se noi vogliamo continuare a mantenere, come dire, tutte le prerogative occidentali della scienza di Stato, e cioè tutte le nostre relazioni che vedono appunto la natura da una parte, il manufatto culturale dall'altra, l'animale di sotto e la pianta di sopra, eccetera, eccetera, praticamente dentro questo, diciamo, arsenale che può essere centrato, misurato, calcolato, non c'è spazio sicuramente per quella scienza nomade che è l'unica condizio sine qua non per poter pensare ecologicamente. Questo secondo me è fondamentale, altrimenti, cioè, come dire, io vedo questa, come dire, ennesima presa di posizione dell'Occidente assolutamente come dire, una riaffermazione, no, dei parametri, dei paradigmi totalmente occidentali. Quindi cosa vogliamo salvare, visto che siamo stati noi artefici e le nostre scienze di quello che praticamente stiamo patendo?
Grazie Marco. We now move on to Ton, whether he wants to comment on this flow of contents that has moved in various directions.
All right, yeah, I think the topic of loss and damage and mourning is a very important one in terms of climate change. So, well, the first speaker mentioned that he didn't want to accept that we will lose things, but I think it's really important that that everybody takes time to mourn and process that we are in such a dire situation in terms of our planet, and we are already losing cultural heritage, we are already losing lives, we are already losing ecologies, and even if we suddenly start treating this crisis as a crisis and get our act together and stay below 1.5 degrees, there will still be a lot of damage. And I think that if you have mourned and if you have accepted that this is the case, you will also be more willing to accept big changes that we'll have to take for our society, and accept and fight harder to still keep it below 1.5 degrees and keep it below a certain level. So I think, yeah, it's really important, and yeah, because otherwise we'll have to do even more mourning. So yeah, that's my opinion. And I think that culture and arts have an important role to play here, to really be able to, for instance, this music piece that Rodney was talking about. These kind of things can really make people, yeah, be aware of what is going on. Yeah.
Okay, so we move on to our last question. We were revolving around the issue of again, it's not really polarizing, but it's just whether data are enough to move conscience and to change behaviors, whether the emotional sphere needs to be taken into account in order to bring about climate change, and the imagery as well. So this is again something that we wanted to ask to Marco, as the arts seems to have been able to show us future images of the future, more maybe than science. I don't know.
Sì, devo dire mi hanno fatto tantissime volte la domanda che cosa può fare appunto un artista per il cambiamento climatico, no? Ma ritorno come dire a quel disappunto originario. A questa domanda io ho sempre risposto: che cosa può fare l'artista per il cambiamento climatico? Rispondo nulla. No, nel senso che siccome siamo di fronte a un macro tema e siamo di fronte veramente, come dire, a qualche cosa che eccede le nostre possibilità d'azioni, questa è la prima domanda. Ora però questa appunto, come dire, indirettamente credo invece si possa fare molto, e qui mi riallaccio a una teorica dei commons, una filosofa femminista che veramente trovo che sia fondamentale anche una sua risposta. Credo che l'arte contemporanea abbia uno scopo fondamentale. Questo scopo fondamentale è quello di reincantare il mondo. Reincantare il mondo significa appunto in qualche modo cercare di restituire delle capacità autonome, cognitive, decisionali ai soggetti comunitari e alle individualità. E naturalmente, come dire, una sensibilizzazione fondamentale, una valutazione veramente del rapporto fondamentale che ormai ci rende interdipendenti ai fenomeni. È certo che di fronte, come dire, all'antropocene, da un lato potremmo dire che finalmente l'Occidente ha raggiunto il suo massimo apogeo, nel senso quello che voleva, e cioè di trasformare da agente in qualche modo biologico a forza geofisica al pari della natura. L'Occidente l'ha ottenuto, e l'ha ottenuto su una scala globale. No, questo, ecco. E questo naturalmente rispetto anche al tema precedente delle perdite, delle sopravvivenze, certo ha perso tanto, ma quello che ha perso veramente di più è soprattutto la capacità decisionale autonoma, la capacità di un autogoverno, la capacità in qualche modo, se io parlo di climate change, di sapere cos'è il clima. No? Nel senso che, come dire, per le figure che ci hanno preceduto, il clima non era soltanto la meteorologia che io vedo nel mio cellulare per sapere che tempo farà domani, ma era qualcosa d'altro, era qualcosa di costitutivo. Ora io mi domando come veramente vogliamo ricostituire qualcosa di fondamentalmente interagente tra noi e, come dire, gli elementi naturali nel momento in cui continua a permanere, come dire, la separazione, no? Che concepisce la natura come fuori dal tempo e dalla storia, e l'umano in qualche modo dall'altra parte come invece totalmente sottratto alla natura e dentro il tempo storico, perché fondamentalmente cioè ci continuiamo a raccontare queste cose. Ecco pertanto che veramente, come dire, sia sul punto di vista dell'organizzazione del dissenso, dell'organizzazione diciamo antagonista, ho visto tantissimi artisti a diverse latitudini del mondo con le quali ho collaborato, veramente anche, come dire, capaci di impostare un discorso fortemente critico e attivista a partire dalle cause fondamentali che hanno motivato questa condizione tradizione contemporanea, ma dall'altra parte credo che, come dire, l'obiettivo veramente dell'arte contemporanea sia realmente quello di reincantare il mondo. Reincantare il mondo significa sostanzialmente restituire, diciamo così, alla nostra capacità d'azione e di interrelazione, no, con le cose, una dimensione totalmente diversa rispetto a quella che abbiamo ereditato dagli ultimi 5 secoli di storia. Naturalmente non sono processi assolutamente facili e quindi, come dire, da un lato, cioè anche impostare veramente il discorso sulla urgenza, la necessità, e certo lì ci sono le terapie mediche, ma sappiamo benissimo che le terapie mediche non rimuovono in qualche modo i sostrati o le cause originarie, diciamo, della malattia. Quindi alla fine la mia grande impressione è che sia un palliativo commerciale, possa risultare tutta questa grande messa in scena e dall'altra parte siamo di fronte invece a un fenomeno mondiale che richiede sicuramente nuove forme di attenzione, nuove forme d'ascolto, nuove forme di cultura, veramente nuove forme di reincantamento rispetto, come dire, al disincanto con cui abbiamo attraversato gli ultimi secoli.
Thank you very much. And Stefano Della Torre, how do you see this re-enchanting the word?
Well, I want to thank Marco Scottini because he pointed out a very important point, that is we have to change mind about these processes. What I mean is that I cannot accept the loss and I refuse this simple mourning because the real issue is not to cut off heritage from life, not to cut off heritage from development. So actually we have to keep the use of heritage, not to divide the real world from museums, and then inside museums we can develop a discourse on the future or something like that. We have to develop a real change about attitudes, opinions, and so on, because it is a matter of awareness, but awareness means only practical actions we have to implement. And to implement practical actions, actually, it's a matter of engagement, not only awareness and so on. That's why I know that we are losing a lot, but I am accustomed to lose as I restore old buildings usually. But the point is there is life going on, and we have to understand how life can go on. So it's a matter of change management. And going to the question, yes, it's a matter of data, it's a matter of empathy, of imagery, and so on. But also, it is also a matter of involving people in real processes. Because I don't know how much ordinary people have a real knowledge about heritage. Sometimes it is just a storytelling which passes through official media, through television, and so on. I think that real practices involving people, maybe also through social media and so on, but involving people, is this something which can work for change. And I know that change management means also to work with resistance as a tool to engage people for change, working on resistance and on resistance processes, such as the fear for change and the fear for loss and so on. Thanks.
Thank you, thank you. I really appreciate the fact that you're really trying to react to one another, and that, I don't know, for us it's really a great time. Alison, do you want to get back to this idea of cognitive versus or together with the affective sphere? You know, we were really, when we interviewed you, we were really struck by this, the way you said that it's time to take action, and that somehow action is in itself a way of understanding things in a way. And I've been thinking about what you said for the time that passed between then and now, and there are references in this in literature and in other forms of activism. But how does this come together with what we were saying?
Thank you, and thanks for both of those inputs. They're really interesting. I suppose what I'd say, Marco, is that I think art can do everything. I think we're probably saying the same thing, but I think it has an amazingly important role to play at the moment. But I also want to just sort of, again, I think we're in danger perhaps of polarizing, of disembodying. And I think one of the things is that we're faced again with an either or. And I think we're seeing this in so many parts of our lives. You either produce data and you act, or you create work around it. And of course, it doesn't work like that. It's fundamentally, what is it asking of us to embody in our heart, souls, minds, the reality of contemporary living. I also, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but I'm not sure that it's true that there aren't many artists. I think perhaps we've not fully engaged with what we are witnessing and experiencing, artists and activists everywhere. And I think we have certainly I feel for myself, I have a responsibility to name it and to champion and to strengthen it. It's one of the main reasons that Julie's Bicycle set up something called the Creative Climate Leadership Programme, which was both to bear witness, to connect creative climate activists and artists with one another, and to model what a creative ecology would could actually be, how we could breathe into it. Data, I suppose, we need data, if only to understand better how we're impacting the world. That is the sort of move against science at the moment that we're seeing. And it's really important that we understand it has, as Rodney's been talking about, a really critical role. But our body, mind, soul selves are much more interesting than that. I think that it is through doing, one of the things that I have really discovered on my own personal journey within Julie's Bicycle is that through doing, rather than through thinking, it is through doing that actually my thinking changes. And we tend to valorize our heads over our hearts and our bodies. And this is calling on us to do something really differently. And one last thing is that I think that in this time of loss and trauma, we also owe it to ourselves, to one another, and to Mother Earth to be aware that everything we do has a consequence, and it's both material consequence and it's also a soul consequence. So I think it's really important that we all, and this goes right back to the beginning, we all take our part in this incredible moment and recognize that whether we're artists, whether we're policymakers, whether we're tour managers, whether we're curators, wherever we are an incredible ecology of practice that needs to give back more than it takes. And that by doing, we change our, we know our brains are plastic. We can change fundamentally, we can change who we are by actually engaging and embodying creative climate, this creative climate world that we now are in.
Thank you very much. And Thorn, would you agree? Did your thinking change through doing?
Yes, oh yes, definitely. I think that's a very important remark. that it's really hard to change your mind about something unless you really start doing something. So I completely agree. And I also really like doing things and trying out new things. And to get back to the question, the third question, so should we focus on data or also the emotional side of things? And I think, of course, it's important to start with the data and to have the science, to really listen to the science and make sure that we really know as much as possible what is going on. But I really think that there is a very important role for the arts to play in this climate crisis for several reasons. So, for instance, art is sometimes able to really show how the absurdity of something or the starkness of something through art. For instance, I think of this this statue called Politicians Debating Global Warming. I don't know if you know it, but it's this a statue of arguing politicians, and they're all almost drowning. So they're all in the water, and so these kind of things you would never be able to tell in a story. But so it can increase awareness and tell the absurdity, but it is also is a way to bring people together. For instance, we organize several musical festivals, music festivals in our incubator, and we're able to bring a lot of people together that also had talks about what is going on in terms of the climate. And lastly, but maybe most importantly, the art is really about imagination, and we will have to change almost everything of our lives, the way we eat, the way we transport ourselves, the way we live, the way the way we treat each other and treat nature. And that means that we have to imagine a whole different future and a new way of organizing ourselves. And that starts with being able to imagine it. Otherwise you can never get there. And the art is really able to create that imagination of how things could be different.
Thank you very much. How do you see that, Alessandra? Are we too much on the thinking side in this debate, or are we doing? And do you feel protective towards your data you've been gathering forever, or do you acknowledge the need for some affective way to get to understand all of that? How do you see from your professional perspective this?
Well, I absolutely agree with the input of the other colleagues that we need data. So I'm a scientist, I'm working with climate change, and I heard about that still it is not understood, which is the difference between climate and meteorology. So which are the impacts? So when we talk about climate change, we need to have a long perspective, even though we need absolutely to act right now, immediately. So data are very much important. We need data based on science, because this is the only way also that we can move and transposing this to policy and decision makers. So for taking actions and let's say recommendations or whatever, or directives or so on, they would like to have data. And these data are absolutely important in my opinion. I would like to say that, well, the way of elaboration and the approach used for elaboration and interpretation of data is also very important. So looking at which is the final objective. So to have our interpretation of data aimed and tailored with the specific objectives that we have planned. So here again, I think the two things are important, also the affective way and the fact that people should be absolutely involved and citizens in all the process. And I would like to say that this, in my opinion, in this framework, arts can really do a lot in maximizing the communication of the impact of communication on the effects of climate change and all the other, let's say, natural disasters and so on, and all social, let's say, challenges that our society is facing. Thank you.
Thank you. And so, Rodney, now it's for you to close this round.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to answer this a little differently, but I think I'd like to pick up on some of the points that the other speakers made. Firstly, Alison's comments about not polarizing, a range of different factors. Thinking and doing are, to me, the same thing. Doing is thinking, and thinking is doing. But also perhaps to pick up on some of Marco's points about what I would call worlding practices. Because if we're to take the work of historians of science, for example, Jeffrey Bowker, data don't just reflect worlds, data make worlds, they build worlds. And the ways in which data are operationalized helps to realize particular kinds of worlds, not just understandings of worlds, but the worlds themselves. And so a lot of my work has actually focused on this sort of world-making capacities of different kinds of technical practices, as well as different kinds of cultural practices. So I started off working with Aboriginal people in Australia, and I worked with Aboriginal people for a long time, and I learned sort of ontological perspectivism or sort of world-making philosophy from the Indigenous people that I was working with, in the same way that singing a particular song line over a particular tract of land makes the world work in a specific kind of way. The work of technicians in laboratories or the work of museum curators in museums also, shapes a particular kind of world. And the world that we're in now has been integrally shaped by some of those practices within heritage institutions, which precisely emphasize the forms of human exceptionalism, the need for endless progress, the hierarchical understandings of race and culture, which underpins so much social inequality. These are all concepts that were developed in Western museums and in Western anthropology and Western archaeology. And they were all developed for particular reasons, to develop a kind of a Western male sort of white hegemony, which is now precisely the kind of philosophical underpinning that we need to begin to challenge. And so I think that museums and heritage organizations are not only deeply implicated in the crisis, but they also have a number of different roles to play in facilitating people to take action in the crisis. But this involves them to really fundamentally rethink the way that they work. So it's not simply a matter of the communication of climate data, which is often what the arts are or cultural organizations are asked to do, is to do something which is fundamentally pedagogical. There's this complicated data, can you help communicate it in a way that makes it legible to the public? But in fact, it requires a fundamental revision of the museum's notions of expertise, their understanding of their role. Their role isn't just to educate, their role is to facilitate action. And so the organizations need to completely reform themselves and re-understand what their roles are. And I think, drawing on the work that we did with the Heritage Futures Project, which was also, fundamentally about the role of creative speculation in developing productive and innovative future imaginaries. These organizations really need to take seriously their claims to act on behalf of the future, not simply to use this as a sort of moral justification for business as usual, but to really engage with the concept of the future in a much more fundamental and realistic kind of way. And so to me, these are the critical questions which cultural organizations need to address in relation to the climate crisis moving forward. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll now leave the floor to Paolo Vitti, board member of Europa Nostra and professor at University of Notre Dame, who will draw some conclusions or final remarks. And after that, we'll open the discussion. So for our still over 200 listeners, if they want to intervene, please write in the chat your question, and write also if it's clearly addressed to somebody or it's just a contribution. Thank you very much. Paolo.
Thank you, Francesca, for giving the floor. Well, I would start saying what an extraordinary opportunity to gather together 6 people like the speakers, because it's a unique opportunity to put on the same, put together people who are passionate about culture and cultural heritage in so many different ways and approaches, which is what we learn from their reactions to the 3 questions. And I think this is what is needed. First of all, we need to approach this topic with different points of view. And each of the speakers brought something to think about. Sometimes I would say it was contradictory one from the other, except from question 1, where everyone was agreeing that is both an individual and collective responsibility, of course. But I would like to start these short concluding remarks with a very important reaction we had in the chat from Adnan, Turkey, which is Europe. We consider Europe, even though it is not in the EU, but he puts together one topic, which is the human drama, which is occurring due to climate change. And this human drama is going to impact tremendously our cities, our places where we live. And I thank him for rising the point, which is the role of cultural heritage and culture in this. And I would like to start with one thing that really has touched me in reading, because in Pope Francis, he has said that the human and environmental crises are one thing. We cannot think about the environmental crisis, the climate change crisis, without thinking the impact on human beings. And of course, here in Europe, I take the point of Marco Scottini that the Western world has created something that doesn't work. But I'm not personally on the same page on thinking that this is over, is an experience that is over. I would rather say exactly the opposite. And there are, from many feedbacks that were given to the different questions, there are several points that mark that there is something to do. I would start, I'm not going, I don't think I'm going point from point, because I have filled my desk with papers and notes, so I will never be able to go and find all the notes that have been taken. But one thing that we learn is that culture and cultural heritage are an important tool, because after all, and we are talking about the cities, I mean the urban context, the cities are an incredible cultural expression. They are the result of cultural expressions. And as such, they can change and develop throughout the time. Now, what we understand that possibly the way they have evolved in the last 50, 60, 70, 100 years has broken something that was more balanced in earlier times, which was what we consider to be a healthy society. What is a healthy society? That there is a relationship between the individual and the collectivity, which is on one direction and in the opposite. The individual feels part of the collectivity, and the collectivity does things where the individual has a position. So here we have to acknowledge that this is a cultural matter, and that by looking back to the experience of the past, we can learn a lot on how recover some elements that connected the single human being to the others, and that all together they were doing something that was meaningful for the society. Now, definitely, the point of the sense we give to what we do is connected to the capacity to control and understand processes. We live into things that happen, but we are most of the time not understanding how things come, how the things work, how we can interact with this. We are out of the processes. And one of the principal things in healthy societies that everybody is inside the processes. So it's a matter that to find the way to recover from the present models, the present society, and I'm totally convinced that we can learn a lot from the past. There is not one side on the other, is not individual, collective, is not cognitive of affective sphere, is all together. What we have understood that yes, we acknowledge that there is a loss, but this loss is not only something that is tangible. I would rather say that is also related very much to intangible values. And these intangible values are something that is the connective stratum of the way we work and what we do. The more we reinforce the intangible part, the more the tangible part will be preserved through many, many ways. So I really thank all the speakers for their contribution, because it was extraordinary. We can have heard about the role of arts, but the role of research, the role of the scientific work, the role of applied sciences. We have understood that there are still incredible values that are still existing in the society, and we really need to bring back and discover these values in the most effective way by looking to what the past has taught us and to regenerating into the future. So I would not go too much beyond that, because I would like to leave half an hour to the questions to the speakers. I really thank all the speakers for the contributions, and I think that going back to the recordings of these reactions and by the publication, we will have a very valuable tool, something to repeat. I'm convinced about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we've got a couple of questions. One is directly related to Marco Scotini, but could also be answered by Alison if she wishes, and it's the implication of contemporary artists using NFT, or more generally the carbon emission of contemporary art market. Do you wish to give a comment to that, Marco?
Innanzitutto, appunto, ritorno su degli aspetti sui quali mi sono soffermato prima. Ringrazio Valentina, però ecco, mi sembrava di essere abbastanza chiaro, e cioè non vorrei veramente confondere i fenomeni di mediatizzazione con la realtà concreta delle cose. Naturalmente questo fenomeno degli NFT è stato un fenomeno montato per ragioni speculative, per tutta una serie di cose, cioè viene fatto, cioè quello che nella realtà viene fatto apparire, per questo in qualche modo ero addirittura dubbioso sulla questione del climate change. Per favore, cioè, se vogliamo fare un discorso ecologico, ecologista, dobbiamo veramente abbandonare tutti quei presupposti che continuano ad alimentare, come dire, la falsa illusione di vivere in un mondo progressista, trasformista e quant'altro. Qui in gioco ci sono o cambi di paradigma o praticamente, cioè, come dire, la protrazione all'ennesima potenza di tutto quello che di sbagliato è stato fatto nel passato. Ora, volevo rispondere anche a Alison perché prima diceva io non ho detto che gli artisti in qualche modo, come dire, hanno una qualche utilità nel climate change. Intendiamoci, cioè gli artisti stanno lavorando seriamente da tanti anni su queste tematiche e veramente io parlo rispetto agli architetti, rispetto a tante altre figure che pensano, come dire, la riformulazione del mondo in un oggetto di design. Qui non è in gioco né il design né gli NFT, è in gioco un cambio di paradigma culturale. Questo è fondamentale. Qui gli artisti sono fantastici, e cioè non possono creare suture a monte, possono lavorare a valle e possono reincantare il mondo, l'ho già detto, hanno un ruolo fondamentale, ma reincantare il mondo sostanzialmente significa scontrarsi con il disincanto quotidiano, e il primo disincanto quotidiano è quello della mediatizzazione. Allora, se la facciamo finita e veramente pensiamo, abbiamo a cuore l'ecologia del mondo, dobbiamo, come dire, chiudere o porci in un'attitudine antagonista nei confronti di quello che continuamente ci viene raccontato da migliaia e migliaia di emittenti nel mondo. Per favore, andiamo veramente nelle comunità dove ancora si fa ecologia, dove sono stato e dove vi ho portato molti esempi, certo ancora fondamentalmente ecologisti, in cui, come dire, non professionisti lavorano con professionisti, ribaltando anche questo rapporto veramente tra esperti e non esperti, ma proprio perché la loro intenzione è contrastare le insidie di un modello che in qualche modo ha portato anche a quello che tutti chiamano, tranne me, cambiamento climatico.
Alison, do you want to get back to this?
I would love to. First of all, absolutely, Marco, I couldn't agree with you more. Just a little bit, which is about NFTs particularly. I'm going to probably do a bit of a Brian Eno here, which is just to challenge NFTs a little bit. It seems to me that a lot of it is it's another market, and it was very interesting in terms of its carbon consequences. I don't know if anybody noticed, but Kosovo suspended the trading of cryptocurrencies over the weekend in direct response to the energy crisis that this new kind of form, this new mechanism, this new economy is so energy intensive that actually it was one of those moments where we had a national government preserving energy in order to stop it. And I think that this speaks to Marco's point about really what does this systemic problem look like? Is it generating new markets, seeing a kind of a new area of exchange, of value exchange as a market force, or is it something that really is at the heart of it, asking a question about what our purpose is actually? How do we, I think such an important question to us all is how, and it's not an easy answer, how do we give back more than we take? What does a regenerative response to the world that we live in now? And Marco's point again about justice, who gets the benefit from these new digital markets? And actually there's so much exciting, purpose-driven, really incredible practice that's happening on the ground in communities, our own communities, as well as communities all over the world. It seems to me that that is the bit where the answers really lie, and that's where we should be directing our gaze.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask Stefano Della Torre whether he wants to get back to our question here regarding the difference between the urban setting and rural villages or situations.
Well, I suppose there is a difference in terms of economy processes which are connected to heritage. So maybe I definitely agree that the problem is one and there is something definitely similar, but the players are different and the processes are different. Then if we look at the upper level, maybe some problems in megacities are due to crisis in the countryside and so on. But looking from the perspective of cultural heritage, we are dealing with different processes and different players. That's why we can speak of an urban agenda, rural agenda. The problem is one, then the tools and the policies can be different, in my opinion.
Paolo, would you like to comment on this? Are you still with us? Yeah.
I would rather leave the floor to the speakers. I mean that it's more useful to see their points of view in terms of these problems. And not to say I would have things to say, but I would love to hear more from what comes from the other speakers.
Okay, thank you. We had another question that I lost. Here. Another question is what kind of contribution museums give in the world to the problem of climate change? I think that some was already said about this, but if Rodney would like to give another short suggestion on projects that can show what has been happening in this field, I think it would be interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I fully understand the question, whether it's about what positive contributions can museums make, or is it about, is the question?
That's what I read as well.
Okay, yeah, so there's a website full of good ideas, which I put into the link. We worked through 80 different ideas and responses to this question that we received from a range of different actors, indigenous people, filmmakers, artists, architects, young people, and we're continuing to gather responses to this question and also to promote them through the website. So I would just say have a look at the website. I'll drop the link back in. Yeah, as I say, I think it's about rethinking the role of cultural institutions and organizations as facilitators rather than as purely as communicators of kind of facts, yeah, sort of working with the communities that different organizations serve to come up with ways in which that might be possible to do in very general terms.
Okay, thank you very much. If we do not have other questions, I would just say that we will be publishing, here. Peter Coles. he says there are some heritage sites that are themselves mitigators of the effects of climate change, like rainwater harvesting in some Venice squares. This very much goes into the direction of some of the things Stefano Della Torre was saying, and also the view of Europa Nostra, I believe. Do you agree, Stefano?
Yes, I do agree. It is the knowledge we have embedded in traditional systems, and we can learn a lot, not exactly to keep the same solutions, but to learn from these solutions to find out something new for the future.
Okay, then I'll just thank you, all of you, again. Really, it's been a great occasion for us to learn from you, and we'll try to put the work we've done together today into a text that we can share. I especially need to thank Francesca and Agnieszka, who have been writing to all of you throughout this year, and who have put this program together and have done all the work for the database. I want to thank Paolo Vitti, who has been always very kind in reading and redirecting ourselves when we got lost in theory or other things. I'd like to thank the interpreters and web learning dream team who helped us through this web seminar, and the communication department that put together the image and the program that we've been looking, and who helped us through creating the knowledge base that you can consult on our website. Most of all, I'd like to thank the management of the Fondazione Scuola dei Beni e delle Attività Culturali, Alessandra Vittorini and Marcello Minuti, who gave us this space that was not in the original plan, but they helped us and supported us throughout creating this roundtable that we really, really enjoyed. Thank you very much to all of you, and I hope this is a dialogue we've just started, and that we can keep on talking to each other and writing to each other to keep this transdisciplinary community alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. And I would say that we much appreciated that in this panel we had also the chance to have representatives of the young generations, which are so important. So thank you to all, everybody. Bye-bye.